Welcome to Spooky Ass Shit. I am your host, the fully recovered, just about, Eric Dwinells. Spookaroos, we've got a lot to get through tonight, but first, I have a question for you. Have you ever considered what you write on social media? I'm sure that you have in some ways, but what I mean specifically tonight is, have you ever considered that what you write on social media, whether it be Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, whatever that thing that you do is, that could be your final word. The final thing that friends will ever hear from you. Say you were to go out and you post something on Instagram and then you leave the house and you get into a car accident. And unfortunately, you expire. Whatever you wrote on Instagram, whatever you posted, that's it. That's the final message the world has from you. Now, I brought this up on my social media once upon a time, and I got a lot of messages back from friends saying, hey, are you okay? Do you need to talk to somebody? But I really didn't mean it in a morbid way, no more morbid than I normally am anyway. I meant it more in kind of a funny way. Like, what if the last thing I write is this review of some shitty TV show that I watched last night, and then I die? Like, you know, in that way, do you think about these kinds of things? I know that I do, and I'm willing to bet that some of you have had this thought too. Please write in and let me know. I am not so crazy. I am not alone in having these thoughts. But that got me thinking about some of our favorite celebrities and figures from history and what were their last words. So tonight, that's what we're going to be looking at. Of course, before we dive in, I want to remind you all to check out the website, spookyas.com or spookyasshit.com. They both take you to the exact same place, and that is the show's blog page. From there, you can listen to each and every episode, even the ones no longer available on iTunes and other streaming services. And you can also find links to all of my social media. Hopefully, none of them will be my final words, because most of it is either some silly-ass shit or some spooky-ass shit. But you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/spookyas. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram, both at spookyasshit. When you go to Facebook, don't forget you can also join our secret closed group, the Spookaroos. Last week, I told you all about the exciting GoFundMe campaign that I have started, and that did not get off to the greatest of starts, to be honest with you. I was sitting at $45 when last we talked. I am happy to report that number has grown up. Some of you have been very generous, and I fully appreciate that. It means the world to me. Looks like I will be able to get that digital recorder, and hopefully I'll be able to get some other fun items to help improve the show with your continued support. I'm going to leave that GoFundMe active until at least June. Who knows? Maybe I'll just leave it up forever, and anytime you guys feel like tossing a dime my way, it'll be there. I'm not sure exactly what I'll do, but at least through the end of June, which happens to be my birthday, by the way. So if you want to help support the show and you want to say, hey, Eric's a good dude, he's been giving us this show for free all this time, let me get him a little birthday gift. Well, that's how you do it. And of course, like I said, this money actually isn't going to me exactly. It's going to improve the show and my street performance in Salem. So if you want to step up and be a part of making the show even bigger and better, this is your chance. And the way you do that is you go to gofundme.com/spookaroos19. That'll take you directly to the campaign, and you can donate there. You can leave your name, you can leave a message, or you can just do it anonymously. And seriously, every little bit helps. In fact, if each one of you listening right now, right this very moment to this very episode, gave $1, we'd be all set, man. We'd have more than enough. So that's really all it takes. Well, actually, GoFundMe does take out a small percentage, so maybe like $1.25 or something would be good. But you get the idea. Back to tonight's episode. Now, I told you already about the social media aspect. I stumbled my way through that explanation, but I think most of you can figure out what I'm saying there. Now, the other part of why I'm doing this episode tonight is because this past Monday was Memorial Day here in the United States, which is a day in memory of the fallen soldiers of wars, and we all get the day off. And I had the day off, and so did a certain young lady that I happen to enjoy her company, and we decided to take a little road trip And if you must know, we went to Shelburne Falls, Massachusetts, and we went to the Bridge of Flowers and a couple other places around there. But also out that way, they have something called a gravity hill. I'm sure a lot of you know what this term is, but just in case you don't, a gravity hill is a hill where you park at the bottom and then seemingly by magic or perhaps spiritual influence, your car rolls up the hill when you put it in neutral. Now, this seems to defy the laws of physics, but of course it's actually an optical illusion created by uneven ground, and it looks like you're going up a hill, but you're actually going down a bigger hill. And these kind of spots exist all over the world, I'm sure. A lot of them have legends attached to it. This one happened to be in Greenfield, Massachusetts, and there's no particular legend attached with this one. It's just kind of a strange phenomena, and people are kind of weirded out by it. Anyway, me and this certain young lady went, and we couldn't get it to work. We didn't try all that hard. We only gave it 2 or 3 tries, and they were kind of half-assed tries, to be honest with you, because this was towards the end of the day, and we were both kind of tired and just wanted to go home and, maybe get some dinner or something. So, we weren't too crazy on it anyway, and it didn't really look like that much of a hill. It just didn't seem all that impressive. So we didn't actually go through with it. Well, we did attempt to go through with it. It just wasn't successful. I was going to make a video for you guys and everything, but it just didn't work out that way. So, oh well. But anyway, on the trip out there, for some reason, we got to talking about last words. And I explained my whole, social media post from a few years back that got me into a bit of trouble with my friends who thought that I was suicidal or something, which at that moment I was not, no problems. And that got me curious to what some of our celebrity and historical figures and like those kinds of people, what are some of the last words that have gone down in history? So I looked some up and I did some research and I found some that I would like to share with you, which is what we're going to do tonight. Now, I tried to kind of group these people together in classifications, which was a little bit hard because, they're from all kinds of different time periods and it's just, it gets a little messy, but I did my best, okay? I did my best. And I would like to start with Robin Williams, because his is a social media post, like I was talking about earlier. Robin Williams, of course, was a very famous actor and comedian, a funny man. I used to love watching his stand-up special live at the Met when I was a child, and I also loved comic relief. I had older brothers, and one of my older brothers and his friend Phil especially, they really enjoyed stand-up comedy and would bring home specials from the video store, and I just felt so cool and adult watching those specials, and I think they had a big influence on me. And anytime they brought home a comic relief special, for example, I was thrilled because I knew that this was going to be an exciting time. And Robin Williams was really off the wall and really high energy and exciting. I probably enjoyed his comedy more as a child, even though half of it went over my head, just because of his presentation. Even more than I enjoy it now, looking back as an adult, where I'm a little bit more jaded and maybe it's not exactly the style of comedy that I would find so delightful today. But as a child, I loved it. So Robin Williams, of course, committed suicide, as we all know, unfortunately, and his final words that we know, he probably said other things at some point, but his final public words were addressed to his daughter Zelda, and they came via Instagram. On July 31st, 2014, he posted a photo that was of Zelda as a baby, and he captioned it, quote, #TBT, and happy birthday to Miss Zelda Ray Williams. Quarter of a century old today, but always my baby girl. Happy birthday, Zelda Williams. Love you. What the world did not know at the time was that Williams was suffering from many health problems at this time, including the onset of Parkinson's disease. He was not quite himself, both physically and mentally, and he committed suicide on August 11th, 2014, at his home in California at the age of 63. Zelda returned the love her father left for her in that Instagram post, saying, quote, "I love you. I miss you. I'll keep trying to look up." She also tweeted a quote from The Little Prince. Quote, You alone will have the stars as no one else has them. In one of them, I shall be laughing. And so it will be as if all the stars were laughing. When you look at the sky at night, you, only you, will have stars that can laugh. Groucho Marx and his brothers, the Marx Brothers, became famous on both the vaudeville circuit and in Hollywood movies. Groucho, in particular, became a true comedy icon because of his one-liners and witty quips. In fact, he became such an icon that yours truly has a Groucho Marx tattoo. And where is it? Well, I guess that's something you'll just have to find out, sunshine. Groucho was hospitalized at the Cedars-Sinai Medical Center with pneumonia on June 22nd, 1977. As he was dying on August 19th, he let out one last quip, saying, "This is no way to live." He was 86 years old. Well, they say that was a quip, and I really hope it was. I hope it wasn't that he was suffering, and that's why he said that. I hope he said it in his own sardonic, kind of humorous way that he was known for. Of course, Groucho wasn't the only funny Marx brother. Groucho's brother Leonard, better known as Chico, a nickname given to him because of his reputation as a ladies' man in his younger days. And ladies' man, I think, is the nice term for it. As he was dying, Chico gave instructions to his wife, saying, "Remember, honey, don't forget what I told you. Put in my coffin a deck of cards, a Mashy Niblick golf club, and a pretty blonde." Heads up, this next one is really sad. Actor and comedian Chris Farley spent his last day in the company of a sex worker named Heidi. She joined Farley at a party at around 11 a.m. There were drugs and blues aplenty. They spent time at the party, then they went to Heidi's apartment and did more drugs, and then later that day, Heidi took Farley back to his apartment, where they smoked crack and snorted heroin. Farley was clearly inebriated, and as she was leaving his apartment, he collapsed on the floor about 10 feet from the door. Heidi claimed she could hear that he was having difficulty breathing. He said his final words to her, "Don't leave me." Figuring he had finally passed out, she snapped a photograph of him lying there and left. Now, I read the article that Heidi did for, I think it was the National Enquirer or the Globe or some kind of classy publication like that. And it actually just came out, I think, just last year. It was very recently. And she says that she didn't know that he was dead or dying. She thought he was just passed out. He seemed to be okay. He was breathing. They actually published the picture that she took. It does just look like he's on the ground sleeping. You can also, if you really want to be bummed out, you can find pictures of Chris Farley as he was discovered by the first responders that came, and there's a clear difference between the two pictures, is how I'll put it, and quite disturbing. But Heidi, for her part, says that he was still alive when she left. He was definitely breathing. She took the picture not in a morbid way because she didn't think he was dead. She took the picture because she thought, well, I will develop this and then we will look at it together next time we meet, and he'll laugh about how out of it he was. I'm not saying that's a good excuse, but that's the excuse that she gives. Farley's brother John found him the following afternoon. Chris was still lying where he had fallen, 10 feet from the door. There was blood-tinged fluid coming from his nose and a white, frothy fluid coming out of his mouth. John called 911. Chicago firefighters received the call just after 2 p.m., and Farley was pronounced dead at the scene on December 18th, 1997. He was 33 years old. When the toxicology results came back, his death was ruled as an accident. Now we move on from our comedians onto our musicians. And of course, we start with the king of pop, Michael Jackson. Of course, Michael Jackson had just signed a contract to do, I believe, 50 shows over in England, and he was in rehearsals for these shows, which became the movie This Is It. He was 50 at the time, almost 51, and a lot of people were saying he was in no shape to perform, and he was having a rough go of it, and we know that he suffered from insomnia and perhaps bunch of other things which we won't even get into, but he was having trouble sleeping, and he used to take a drug called propofol, which, by the way, is the same stuff they gave me when I had my ankle reset. And when they mentioned what they were going to give me for anesthesia, I got a little bit nervous thinking about old Michael Jackson. Anyway, he had a very different reaction to it. He loved the stuff, and he would use it as a sleeping aid, which is definitely not how it's supposed to be used. Propofol is very powerful, and like I said, it's used in hospitals as an anesthetic. His doctor, Conrad Murray, was with him that night, and Murray reports that Michael kept asking for more milk. These would be Michael's final words. Now, when he talks about milk, that is the propofol, because it is kind of a milky substance, milky-looking substance that you get intravenously. And he overdosed on it and died as a result. And of course, later, the doctor would be found guilty of actually murdering Michael Jackson. Not intentionally, but that he should have known better, and it was a direct result of his actions that Michael Jackson died. So the doctor was found guilty. As a result of Dr. Murray's actions, Michael Jackson did finally fall asleep on June 25th, 2009, while lying in his bed at his rented mansion in Los Angeles. Jackson was reportedly not breathing, and CPR was performed while rescuers were on their way. And they took him to the UCLA Medical Center, where for more than an hour and a half after arriving there, they continued to work on him. But alas, it was the end of Michael, and he was pronounced dead at 2:26 p.m. on June 25th, 2009. He was 50 years old, almost 51. I remember that day clearly, actually. I was working with a respite client. That means someone that I take out one-on-one after hours to go and do, errands and stuff that they might need to do for their own life and help them with that kind of thing. And this was someone I'd worked with a long time. I brought him home. He happened to live with his father, and his father was an elderly man. And we walked in, and I could see over his shoulder on the TV that there was a special report, breaking news. And they looked like they were outside of a hospital and, ambulances, and I couldn't hear the TV. And I said, "Oh, what's going on?" And he kind of looked up nonchalantly, and he was like, "Oh, Michael Jackson died." And I was like, "Oh, geez." And now I know this man was from a different generation, but when I was little, Michael Jackson was the man. Like, he was the biggest star in the world, Thriller and all that stuff. According to the things that I've seen and heard recently, and also for many years now, Michael Jackson would have loved me when I was a kid too. But at the time, we didn't know about any of that stuff, and he was just, I had the doll and everything. I had the Michael Jackson doll with the blue jacket. I specifically wanted the blue jacket, and I loved Thriller, and I still love Thriller to this day. Although, of course, having watched the HBO documentary Leaving Neverland recently, my opinion of Michael Jackson has changed somewhat, and it is a little bit more difficult to just enjoy the music these days. It's kind of like the Cosby Show, Of course, Michael Jackson was not found guilty in a court of law, but when there's so much smoke, there tends to be a fire, is my personal opinion. This is getting gross. Let's move on from the king of pop to the king of rock and roll, who also had his problems with people underage, but he ended up marrying her, so I guess it's okay. Early in the morning of August 16th, 1977, at his Memphis mansion, Graceland, Elvis Presley said to his fiancée, Ginger Alden, "I'm going to go to the bathroom and read." They would be the last words that he ever spoke. Hours later, at 2 p.m., when Alden woke up, she noticed that Elvis had not returned to the bed. She knocked on the bathroom door, calling his name, and then opened it. She discovered Elvis slumped over on the bathroom floor. When she bent down to touch him, his skin was cold, and he was not breathing. He was 42 years old. Due to his personal beliefs and values, reggae star Bob Marley refused to have a toe amputation after he'd been diagnosed with melanoma cancer in 1977. Had he gone through with this amputation, it is possible that the cancer would not have spread. But it did, and it became fatal. In 1981, while Marley was flying home from Germany to Jamaica, his vital signs took a steep turn for the worse. After an emergency landing in Miami, Florida, he was taken to the hospital for medical attention. On his deathbed, the Jamaican superstar called his son Ziggy to his side and spoke his final words. "Money can't buy life." Bob Marley died on May 11th, 1981, at the age of 36. Drummer Buddy Rich is considered one of the most influential drummers of all time and was known for his virtuoso technique, power, and speed. Rich performed right up until his final days when he was hospitalized after suffering a probable stroke. A series of health problems were discovered while he was in the hospital in short order, including a brain tumor. He was being prepped for surgery to remove the tumor when a nurse asked him, "Is there anything you can't take?" Rich replied, "Yeah, country music." This would turn out to be his last words, as he suffered a fatal heart attack during the surgery. He died on April 2nd, 1987, at the age of 69. Rapper Tupac Shakur and his bodyguards got into a scuffle with 21-year-old Crips gang member Orlando Anderson in the lobby of the MGM Grand Casino in Las Vegas while leaving a boxing match on September 7th, 1996. Shakur and Death Row Records CEO Suge Knight drove off into the evening, but they didn't get too far. A gunman approached their car and opened fire on Shakur, leaving him with multiple bullet wounds. The first police officer to arrive at the scene, Chris Carroll, says Shakur was still alive when he arrived. Carroll asked Shakur who shot him multiple times, but received no answer. Carroll told Billboard magazine, quote, "He basically kept ignoring me. And then I saw in his face, in his movements, all of a sudden, in the snap of a finger, he changed. And he went from struggling to speak, being non-cooperative, to I'm at peace kind of thing, just like that. He went from fighting it to I can't do it. And when he made that transition, he looked at me. He looked right into my eyes. And that's when I looked at him and I said one more time, 'Who shot you?' He looked at me and he took a breath to get the words out, and he opened his mouth, and I thought he was actually going to give me some cooperation. And then the words came out. Fuck you." After that, he started gurgling and slipping out of consciousness. At that point, an ambulance showed up and he went into unconsciousness. End quote. The 25-year-old Shakur never woke up. Now we're moving on to a group that I call innovators. These are men from different lines of work, but they all made an impact on the world in their own way. On October 5th, 2011, inventor and Apple founder Steve Jobs lay in bed suffering from pancreatic cancer. He'd lost consciousness the day before and woke up only briefly in the final hours of his life. His sister, Mona Simpson, described his death. Quote, "Before embarking, he looked at his sister Patty, then for a long time at his children, then at his life's partner, Lorraine, and then over his shoulders past all of them. Steve's final words were, 'Oh, wow. Oh, wow. Oh, wow.'" End quote. He then lost consciousness and died several hours later. He was 56 years old. In November of 1966, Walt Disney was diagnosed with lung cancer, and treated with cobalt therapy. On November 30th, he felt unwell and was taken to St. Joseph's Hospital, where, on December 15th, 10 days after his 65th birthday, he died of circulatory collapse caused by the lung cancer. His final words were not spoken, but written on a scrap of paper just before he died. What words of wisdom did Walt leave the world? None. He wrote down a name, Kurt Russell. And yes, he was referring to that Kurt Russell. No one knows why Disney decided to name drop the then 15-year-old actor Kurt Russell on his deathbed, but Russell was starring in the recently released Disney film Follow Me, Boys at the time of Walt's death. He would go on to star in many Disney movies, most recently Guardians of the Galaxy Part 2. Volume 2, I should say, sorry. Disney's remains were cremated 2 days later, and his ashes were interred at the Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. Despite the popular urban legend, he was not frozen, in part or in whole. Stephen Hawking was a theoretical physicist, cosmologist, author, and director of research at the Center for Theoretical Cosmology within the University of Cambridge. Hawking had a rare early-onset, slow progressive form of ALS, which paralyzed him over the decades. His last words in an interview were, quote, "I have lived with the prospect of an early death for the last 49 years. I am not afraid of death, but I am in no hurry to die. I have so much I want to do first. I regard the brain as a computer which will stop working when its components fail. There is no heaven or afterlife for a broken-down computer. That is a fairy story for people afraid of the dark." He died from complications of his disease on March 14th, 2018, at the age of 76. Now we're going to move on to some general historic figures. I didn't know exactly how to classify these people, so I just put them under historical figures. And let's hear from a lady. We haven't heard from a lady yet. I guess their last words are not recorded as often historically as some of the men, so that's what you get, I guess. Marie Antoinette was the last queen of France before the Revolution, which began in 1789. The Revolution was successful, and the new government tried the disgraced queen on a number of charges. Early on the 16th of October, 1793, Marie Antoinette was declared guilty of depletion of the national treasury, conspiracy against the internal and external security of the state, and high treason. The last charge alone was enough to condemn her to death. So it was that Marie Antoinette found herself being led to the guillotine. On her way, she stepped on her executioner's foot. It is to him that she spoke her last words. "Excuse me, sir. I did not mean to." She was beheaded on October 16th, 1793. She was 37 years old. On his deathbed, Italian artist Leonardo da Vinci proved that he was, in fact, a tortured artist, despite being regarded as perhaps one of the greatest artists to have ever lived. His final words, quote, "I have offended God and mankind because my work did not reach the quality it should have." He died on May 2nd, 1519, at the age of 67 years. Benjamin Franklin was one of the founding fathers of the United States of America. However, he was never ever a president. A lot of people get confused about that. Never a president. He was actually already let me try that sentence again. He was actually already in ill health by the time of the Revolution. He didn't live too much longer after the Revolution, as a matter of fact. As Benjamin Franklin lay dying at the age of 84, his daughter suggested that he change position in bed so that he could breathe more easily. Franklin's last words, spoken to his daughter, were, "A dying man can do nothing easy." He died from pleuritic attack at home in Philadelphia on April 17th, 1790, again at the age of 84. And pleuritic attack, by the way, easy for me to say, I looked it up, it's basically like fluid on the lungs, an inflammation of the lining of the lungs, the membrane and everything. And this is something that people can get. It's usually not super serious as long as you're being treated, but back in olden days and at his advanced age and everything, I think it was a little bit more serious back then. So that's what that means. All right, Nostradamus. I don't want to waste too much time on this asshole because I'm going to do a whole episode about him and all his bullshit someday. But to the surprise of no one, a lot of his believers claim that he predicted his own death, and that could be true. A lot of people seem to kind of know when they're going, as we've seen in some of these quotes. Nostradamus is said to have predicted that, quote, "Tomorrow at sunrise, I shall no longer be here." And he was right. The next morning, he was reportedly found dead lying on the floor next to his bed and a bench. Now, of course, if you want to nitpick, technically the next morning he was still there, physically, body anyway, he was still there. And of course, if he didn't die, he could have just left in the morning and gone somewhere else, and that way his prediction would still be true too. So, even if he really did make the prediction, of course, a good psychic always has ways out. Speaking of criminal fucks, let's move on to some actual criminals. There's been a lot of criminals who are given their last words, before execution or whatever, and a lot of them come up with some interesting things to say. I like these two in particular. I'm just going with two because I want to keep it kind of light. We have first convicted murderer Thomas J. Grasso, who used his last words to complain about his last meal. When they asked for his final words, he said, "I did not get my SpaghettiOs. I got spaghetti. I want the press to know this." That's a man taking a stand. He wanted his goddamn SpaghettiOs. And I can't imagine where that's a big disappointment. SpaghettiOs are quite different than actual spaghetti. And if you've got a hankering, if you want to be taken back to your childhood, I hope that this man didn't become interested in SpaghettiOs in his adult life, then, you want SpaghettiOs, not spaghetti, which I think most of us would agree is actually a better meal than SpaghettiOs, but it's your last meal. Thomas Grasso, I guess that's the choice. But on the other hand, what about those people you murdered? What choice did they have? So, go fuck yourself. Now, let's talk about another murderer, James W. Rogers. He was put in front of a firing squad in Utah, and when asked for his last words, he said, "Bring me a bulletproof vest." I mean, he's a murderer, but he's still got a sense of humor. Moving on to a new section, our final section, our last two, we have some that I didn't quite know where to put. I guess I could have put them both in with the innovators, I guess. But they're both known for their creepy stories, so they kind of fit together, and I'm putting them here at the end in a group I just call Odds and Sods, named after a Who album. First up, film director and producer Alfred Hitchcock, as he lay in his Bel Air home dying of kidney failure on April 29th, 1980, his final words were, "One never knows the ending. One has to die to know exactly what happens after death, although Catholics have their hopes." He was 80 years old. And finally, let's wrap it up with our old pal Edgar Allan Poe. I hope that you've all listened to the old episode I did with my good friend Julie. We talked all about Edgar Allan Poe because, of course, Edgar Allan Poe is from Boston, but lived most of his life and created most of his famous works in Baltimore. So I'm from Boston, Julie's from Baltimore. We got together and talked Poe one night, so go back and listen to that episode. But tonight, we're just going to talk about his death and final words. He had a very unusual and very interesting death, which could be a whole episode on its own, but let's just talk about it in brief here. On October 3rd, 1849, Edgar Allan Poe, author of The Raven and Telltale Heart and about a million other famous creepy stories and poems, was found wandering the streets, delirious and wearing clothes that were not his own. He was, to quote his physician, in great distress and in need of immediate assistance. He was taken to Washington Medical College, where he slipped in and out of consciousness. Poe was never coherent long enough to explain how he came to be in the condition that he was found in, he is said to have repeatedly called out the name Reynolds, though who or what Reynolds may have been remains a mystery. Some sources report that Poe's final words were, "Lord help my poor soul." He died in hospital on Sunday, October 7th, 1849, at 5 in the morning. He was only 40 years old. The exact cause of his death also remains an enduring mystery to this day. So that wraps it up for this episode. Of course, I do want to point you to the website again, spookyas.com. Check out all our links. Check out our social media. We are at SpookyAsShit on both Twitter and Instagram. Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/spookyas. Don't forget to join the Spookaroos there on Facebook. And of course, if you are in a position to help the show, even if it's just $1 or $2, or hell, if you want to give more, go ahead. Please go to the GoFundMe. That is gofundme.com/spookaroos19. And Spookaroos is spelled exactly the way it sounds. And again, I just really appreciate you listening to the show. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and review on iTunes or whatever platform you happen to listen from. And I got a question for you guys, too. Oh, first of all, before I forget again, I want to mention I'm trying releasing the show on Fridays for now. So if you've noticed that it switched from what was supposed to be Sundays and kept getting looser and looser, I'm trying to stick to Fridays for a while and see how that goes. See if it gives me more time to make the episode during the week and polish it up instead of trying to cram it all in one weekend. So that's what's going on there. Now, the question that I have for you, after talking about all these famous last words, have you thought about your own last words? Have you thought about words you would like to say? Now, of course, most of us won't get the option to decide our own last words. It'll probably come as a surprise to us when the time comes, and hopefully in our sleep. But have you thought about what would be your final words, or what you would want to have as your final words? For me, I would like to say that I would say something about, peace and love and understanding and a call for that kind of unity. But hell, you didn't listen to Jesus, you didn't listen to Gandhi, you didn't listen to Martin Luther King, you didn't listen to John Lennon, so why the hell would you listen to some schmuck with a spooky podcast? So I guess if I'm considering last words, I could do a lot worse than don't be afraid.